Hi everybody, it's Christina. Welcome back to Adventures in Polish Land. Today I have a review of Bastard Out of Carolina by Dorothy Allison. I read this for the American Lit Reading Challenge for a book set in South Carolina. I had never heard of this book before the challenge, but I'm so glad I found out about it and read it because it was such an incredible book. Bastard Out of Carolina follows Ruth Ann. She is a young girl who is growing up in a poor white family in rural South Carolina. At the beginning of the novel, we learn that she was actually born early because her mother was in a car accident, and when she was born at the hospital, her family members did not know who her birth father was because her mother was an unmarried teenager. And so because they didn't know what name to write on the birth certificate, she ended up getting stamped with a red stamp on her birth certificate that she is a bastard. And this sets the tone for the remainder of the novel. Her mother tries to get this document changed and updated several times over the course of the book, but is ultimately unsuccessful for several years. So in the book, we are following Bone as she deals with what it's like growing up in her community. They move a lot because they can't afford to pay the rent, so they keep getting kicked out. And her mother is constantly working to make a better life for them, but she is often unsuccessful. What is worse, though, is that her mother marries this man called Daddy Glenn, and he is Bone's stepfather, and for whatever reason, he treats Bone horribly. He not only sexually abuses her, but he physically abuses her to the point where she has to go to the hospital multiple times. This makes the book really challenging to read because some scenes are just absolutely horrific, but I think it was really important to include that in the book because I'm sure that this is something that not only happens in real life today, but this book is also loosely based on the author's real life. And so thinking that she might have gone through similar things in her childhood is absolutely heartbreaking. And I'm glad that she had the opportunity to tell this story because I'm sure it makes other children who faced similar circumstances feel less alone. One thing that I really loved about The Bastard Out of Carolina is the theme of family. Bone comes from a very big extended family, and they are rough and tumble, but they also truly do love each other. Bone spends a lot of time with her aunts and uncles. They all pitch in to help care for one another, which I really enjoyed. And I think it was also important to show how all of them are doing their best. They don't have a lot of money or resources. They have to make do with what they have. And they go through absolutely challenging times. And I think especially when this book is set in the 50s and 60s, you can see how women who have stillbirths, for example, or miscarriages, they do not have the resources that we have today. And you can argue that today we don't have enough resources either, but they were expected to just move on with their lives, and that was not easy for them. And so you can see throughout the course of the novel how the family will come together and be there for one another, even in the worst of times. I also really liked how this book would focus on different aspects of Bone's childhood as the book went on. So, for example, there is an entire section about a friend that she makes who she acknowledges that she doesn't really like this girl, but for whatever reason, she's friendly with her because perhaps she's the only friend she will ever have throughout her childhood besides her cousins. So she will go to all of these different church events with this friend, and she will go over to the friend's house and spend time with her parents, but she acknowledges that she doesn't even really like this girl. So it's this interesting dichotomy of not wanting to be alone and having this excuse to get out of the house away from Daddy Glenn, but she also knows that maybe she's taking advantage of this girl because she doesn't really like her. I thought that was a really interesting exploration of friendship because so many people are friends out of convenience and maybe because it's easy to be friends with them even if they might not be a good match platonically. The writing in this book was also very well done. I always wanted to be reading, and although it took me a little bit of extra time to read the book, I was never bored. I always wanted to know what was going to happen next, and I was always rooting for our main character. I think this book truly is a story of perseverance. Even when the absolute worst happens to you, you will find a way to get through it. You will get up, you will keep going, you will march forward, and in the end, I think that Bone will have a good life. It's going to be really difficult to overcome all of her challenges, but I think there is a message of hope and of finding good in the world, even when the people who are supposed to love you the most may be betraying you at the end of the day. One of my favorite characters in the book is Ruth's aunt. She is super sweet. She lives alone, and you find out more about her backstory as well. But I really loved her bond with Bone. She really took care of her. She put her to work at her farm, and I think it was just really nice to see an aunt and niece relationship. So I really enjoyed that aspect as well. And I also think this book was a perfect choice for the American Lit Reading Challenge because I really got to see what a community in South Carolina looked like. It seemed like it's a very specific type of people at this point in time who would have lived in these rural areas, and I think this was a very good exploration into that. Overall, I would definitely recommend this book, but I would keep in mind that it deals with very challenging topics, so you might want to look up the content warnings in advance because, like I said, some scenes are very, very brutal. The author does not hold back, and it can be extremely upsetting, so keep that in mind. That being said, I do recommend it otherwise. I gave this book a 4-star rating, and I would consider reading more from this author in the future. You will have to let me know in the comments if you have read Bastard Out of Carolina and if you liked it, and if you have any other recommendations for books set in South Carolina, I would love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.